I'm Chris Haran. Saw a lot of you already this morning. I'll do the antitrust policy real quick. RESO strives to increase competition in the work marketplace and will not be a forum for anti-competitive conduct. Our policy governs the activities of RESO and its members, including this meeting, and a link to the policy was emailed to you with the meeting agenda. Please consult RESO's counsel if you have any questions. All right, so getting started. I am up here by myself today, so we just want to give a quick shout out to Catherine, still in Canada, working hard at Listed, her company there, so we're going to miss her today. But she's a great vice chair, does a lot of work, put together a lot of the slides for today, and any of you who have been in the work groups, or really any of the work groups outside of ours, have probably ran into Catherine and got to spend some time with her. So, hey Catherine, hope you're listening. I'm Chris Haran. I work at MRED, also the chair of the Interoperability Workgroup, and I've been around for 7 years, I think, since we started this work group back up. So it's been fun to do that. Okay. Is this for questions? Or? Okay, you want me to do this one now? Okay. All right, so I'm going handheld, I guess. So let's see here. Nope. Okay. So agenda for today, we want to talk a little bit about some of our recent accomplishments since the spring conference. Always like to share what's been going on. I have worked really hard to hopefully not torture a metaphor too much about what bourbon can teach us about real estate interoperability. So hopefully I didn't have to stretch that too far. We'll have a little bit of fun with that. We've been talking a lot about offer management in our group the last couple of months and some different ways that we can potentially make that easier to do interoperability with offer management. And then part of what our group does is whether it's R&D talking about new pain points and cases to work through, or data dictionary proving standards, or transport putting together new implementation methods, we in our group do like to look at different ways of how do we talk about different ways to use RESO standards. So it's not just interoperability as far as passing the data, it's also interoperability and like, let's actually use this stuff, right? So we'll talk a little bit about ULI, UPI, and many of the other ways that RESO is driving interoperability. So since the spring conference, what have we been up to? We've done a lot of work on ActivityPub. How many people here know what ActivityPub is? Raise your hands real quick. Okay, a couple, that's good. So ActivityPub is a new protocol that we've been looking at. It's used by a lot of different social networks right now. It's a good way, very good lightweight way to pass messages back and forth, to promote or advertise certain changes to your data. And it seems like something that could be very promising for especially vendor-to-vendor work in the interoperability space. So we've done a little bit on that. We're going to talk more about that later because we did cover that at the spring conference. And also the transport group has been working a lot with ActivityPub, especially around ULIs. We also re-reviewed our offer management payloads. So we had done that a little while ago to see if I was an offer management coming into the space and I wanted to use the data dictionary, what fields might be most critical for me to start with. So we made some recommendations there, and we're starting to recirculate that back with current companies in the space just because there's been a lot of new people come into offer management of late. And then some other things that have been brought up that we haven't dug too deep into, but which are very interesting and may not end up with us. It may go with another group, but we've talked about it a bit. We've talked about model context protocols, the MCP, talked about AI, and is there some sort of interoperability standard for passing data between different large language models? Is there an opportunity there for us to talk about that? We've also talked about SEO and how SEO is changing. You may have heard of GEO, generative engine optimization. So the idea, I spent at Coldwell Banker when I was on the brokerage side, one of the first things I did with my career was actually teaching agents all about search engine optimization and how to write your profiles in such a way that you got the right keywords to show up in the Google search rankings, how to do, not do black hat things like using the same color text on the background of your website because that could penalize you. Now we're seeing the start of GEO and how you write your profiles, how you write your websites, how you write your content to be discovered in the AI search results that's popping up above the regular search results. So we've talked a little bit about that. And again, we're not doing anything with any of those three yet, but it has been something that's come up in our group. We've had some back and forth discussion, and we're going to see where that goes. So let's get into the meat of today. And for those of you who aren't bourbon fans, this is the official bourbon requirements, what it takes to be a bourbon. Can anyone tell me what that is? That's a standard, right? That is a standard that you have to pass to be considered bourbon. If you do not fit that standard, you cannot call yourself bourbon. And for those of you who have been testing that out, I'm sure you've heard a little bit of education on that. But I do think it's really interesting that there is this standard there. So you know, when you buy a bottle of bourbon, I'm expecting at least 51% corn mash. I know it's been aged in new oak barrels. I do know that if it's been aged less than 4 years, they have to tell me that because it's not got a certain amount of time that it's been aged there. I do know what my maximum and minimums are going to be, or my maximums for my proofs, and I also know that there can't be specific flavorings or colorings added. So I know these things going into it, right, with bourbon. So I know that there's a certain baseline standard of what to expect. And once you have that baseline standard, obviously there's a bunch of different ways to do that. There's a bunch of different barrels you can distill it in. There's a bunch of different ways that you can age it to get different flavors. But the idea is, if you've got that one standard that you all agree on, then you can start to iterate on that. You can build on it. You can create new variations around it. So with standards, choice becomes inevitable. This is different ways to drink bourbon. Obviously, we had neat at the beginning. But obviously, you can do Manhattans. You can do straight up. You can do mint juleps. You can do your old fashioned. You can do it on the rocks. But the idea is that it's still got bourbon at its core. So how does that metaphor translate? And it's not just me talking about bourbon because I love bourbon. I really do look at bourbon as like data, right? Data in real estate, that is the standard that we're working through. That's the data dictionary. And with interoperability, we're trying to identify challenges for real estate practitioners where systems don't operate and then find solutions for them. And some of those industry challenges that we work on in interoperability is things like data duplication, collision of user identities. How do we make sure that those two things are going from one system to another? We have a lot of frustration with conflicting or missing data, or data being stuck in silos. And probably most importantly, too much money spent managing data. Because if we don't agree on kind of that underlying data, and that data can't go from one system to another, then you as a vendor working on it have to spend a lot of money mapping it. You have to spend a lot of money getting it from different places and making sure that you're doing that standard yourself. So, am I making sense? Does it actually fit as a metaphor, or do I just really want to talk about bourbon to the end of the day today? So, all right. So, we all need to start somewhere. And with interoperability, sometimes it can seem very overwhelming. With RESO, it can seem very overwhelming. Like, how do I get started as a new company? How do I use these standards? How do I dive into the work groups? And for me, bourbon was kind of like that. I forgot to look up when it started, but how many people have watched the show Justified in this room? We got Justified fans? That's great. So Justified came out, I think it was over a decade ago. And Justified is what made me decide I wanted to start drinking bourbon. For those of you who watch that show, it's based here. They talk about bourbon all the time. Now, little did I know that one of the things they like to talk about the most in that show is a bourbon called Pappy Van Winkle. Anyone ever had Pappy? Yeah. Anyone know what Pappy goes for right now for a bottle? It's like a couple $1,000s on the resale market, because if you can't, you can get in the lottery and get it for regular resale, but most of the time you're buying it off a secondary market. So I was like, well, I don't know if I like bourbon. I want to get started somewhere. So I went to my local Costco, and they had a $20 bottle of bourbon, and that's how I got started drinking bourbon, drinking my brown liquor. It wasn't anything crazy expensive, crazy fancy. It was enough to know that I could just get started, get used to bourbon, and then I start building from there. I find RESO and real estate to be very similar to that concept, right? Like at some point, you just got to pick an entry and just jump in and start working on it. And it doesn't have to solve all the world's problems. You just have to solve a little one, and then you keep solving more and more on top of that. So that's how you start somewhere. And so one of those problems we're looking at now is ActivityPub. And one of the things I forgot to mention to make this a little bit more interactive is if you see your favorite bourbon on the screen there, I was trying to give as much love as I could throughout all of these, but ActivityPub is a new riff on a way to get transported data from system to system. And as I mentioned before, that ActivityPub protocol is very simple, kind of like a messaging system. You're getting messages, you're posting messages. You have a lot of control over who can subscribe to your content, of what kind of visibility you have to your content. So it does seem like this is a really easy way that's being used in a bunch of other industries, because obviously social messaging, threads, conversations, that's something everyone's used to right now. So how do we translate that to real estate? So one of the things we showed at the spring conference was this conversation about a listing. At the time we were talking about like the entire transaction and how it could go from start to finish. But since spring, we decided to dig into one specific part of that, which was offers. So you can see here, second to the bottom, we had an offer app that had subscribed to that thread, was listening to that thread, and the buyer agent working with that said, hey, I've got a client that wants to make an offer. So they CC'd the agent, and then you've got that link to the offer system that would have the app within it. And that was the whole message. Like, that's how simple this potentially could be if we started to go that way. And especially if you have 46 agents and 46 different offer systems, this could be a really easy way for you as the listing agent to collect that information in a standardized way. And so we wanted to talk a little bit, and this is some of the conversation that we do have in our work group is, okay, well, let's talk through what an offer looks like, what that journey looks like for it. And the offer that everyone hears about, it's a message that can travel between systems instantly, and we did a little bit of like storyboarding. This is something we like to do a lot because this helps us when we talk through these specific steps that happen in a transaction or in a specific type of system. We can find the holes. We can find the places where data needs to flow. We can find where we might be able to apply some standards to it. So the example here is we've got the listing going live. We've got some buzz beginning, 48 hours. We've got followers coming across all the different apps. There might be showing apps. There might be offer apps listed. As I mentioned before, that's Catherine's company. You might be doing that just to get updates on like search on the sales price, things like that. So we've got an offer that gets submitted, and then the MLS may trigger that update event. So if the MLS is with the offer management app, maybe they're saying, hey, there's been an offer on this, or maybe the MLS is also publishing that this has gone into a new status. Maybe it's gone into contingent, gone into pending, whatever it might be. But then that reaction, because it's been published, because that message has been pushed, everyone else ingests that that's already following that thread, and they can all show that same status change. And then from the follow-through, we've got the first offer. Maybe we've got it be accepted. Maybe we've got it be countered, whatever that might be. But again, that's still going through that same publishing network. And only the people that want to know, that have subscribed to that, are seeing it. So in the big picture, this does help the MLS remain the source of truth, but it also allows a lot more of the ecosystem to be involved. And everything doesn't have to necessarily run through the MLS. You could have the offer management companies working directly with each other. You can have the brokerages being more involved. So it lets the transaction, hopefully the digital transaction that is, hopefully be a little bit more efficient and a little bit easier, and lets everyone connect into it more and more. Because again, we continue to hear that brokerages want, agents want that end-to-end solution to have everything happen in one place. And that's just going to be probably a little bit too difficult for any one vendor to build or any one tool to do everything well. So this allows everyone to be a part of the party. One quick side note, Booker will always be one of my truths because actually it's a very special bottle. When I first was told by my wife that we were pregnant, that was the bottle she gave me. And she luckily did not hand it to me before she told me the news. Otherwise, that might have been a very expensive bottle on the floor. All right, so this is just a simple code snippet of that event. And this is where we've talked a lot about where does RESO fit in? This is common format. How can we use common format and apply it to ActivityPub? So when we're creating this stuff, this could potentially be a way to push it out there. This is a lot of the work that transport does. We do not do this kind of work necessarily in interoperability. This comes from Josh and from Paul and that whole group and some of the work they're doing. But we want to look at, okay, well, what kind of information would we want to be passing in that snippet of code, right? Like what use cases can we apply to that? And then can we get the vendors, the MLSs, the brokerages on board to participate in that? And ultimately, this is all about getting your barrel of choice, right? So getting your product of choice. We've talked about that a lot in our work group, a lot on this stage. If you don't have to compete on data in this space, you can compete on the actual product. You can make your product better. You're not spending a bunch of money just trying to map data, store data. You're spending that money, you're spending that time, you're spending those resources on making your barrel better than the others and helping people to choose your barrel. So as I mentioned, with offer management, we're doing a little bit of recruiting right now. We're going out and talking to offer companies in the space. We had a final offer. Tim Quirk from there showed up to one of our work group meetings and talked through a little bit about some of the possibilities that he'd be interested in being interoperable with other systems. We've also had a couple other conversations with groups that aren't ready to be named yet, but the idea is that we want to have buy-in from these offer management companies, especially since it is still pretty new, especially in the MLS world, and could we get something that does work better from the start instead of trying to come on it later. So this is a sample of the payload sheet that we've been working on, and if you have suggestions on offer management companies, if you're working with an offer management company, if you are an offer management company, love to talk to you, love to have you be a part of that work group and be part of that conversation with us. Questions on offer management or ActivityPub before we move on to the next one? I'm going to pretend to make this interactive a little bit, although I've seen it's a little rough. All right, moving on then. Oh, go ahead.
I'll ask a question. So I know a little bit about what you've been doing, obviously. Can you tell us a little bit more about any assets that came out of this? I believe there was a little bit of a demo built, wasn't there?
Yes, actually for my next one. Sorry, that got really loud. Yep, no, that was a great segue into the next section. Thanks, Paul. But I will say, What we have built on this is we are helping RESO staff with creating best practices around some of these things. So like with payloads, with offer management, maybe even with ActivityPub, we kind of say, with this standard, what are the best use cases for it? Where could you run into problems? Where could you run into issues? And hopefully at some point that turns into some education and helps people understand how they can better use those. And then Paul was mentioning we have done a little bit of work with this. This is more with my other hat. With MRED, we've done some work in these areas, but ULI has been very interesting, and RESO identifiers in general have been very interesting. And we've spent a long time talking about ULI these last couple of months, internally at MRED, and also with the interop group, and also with the transport group. We also had the double with the unique organization identifier. I heard that get talked about briefly in the R&D group right before this. And then we've also talked a lot about the unique parcel identifier. So all three of those three identifiers are really meant, especially with all of those challenges that I showed before, to help solve some of those challenges. And so I want to talk a little bit about UPI, but first, a quick tangent. I originally wanted this picture. I wanted to have this prompt for that picture. I had to have a couple AI shots in here. And the AI told me no. Like, look at that message back. Said it was too depressing, basically, for me to generate that picture, so they wouldn't let me do it. So I had to do a straight shot of bourbon instead of the guy, after having a single shot, double shot, and a triple shot with those three identifiers, I'd be down for the count after 6 things of bourbon. But ChatGPT decided I could not show that to you today. So instead we got a neutral, boring, atmospheric bar scene. So that's just me complaining about AI, and it's censoring me. All right, UPI. If you're in transport, you see these diagrams. And to Paul's point, this is what we've used at MRED as we've started to work through this. And this is something we're hoping to show more at the spring conference. So I'll get into a little bit about what we'll do there. But with UPI, it is built, or ULI, sorry, with ULI, it is built to be a decentralized network. So we can use authentication from other systems to authenticate our own users. And the idea there is we obviously have agents that cross over markets a lot, right? And we don't have a really specific ULI right now. The NERDS ID is close, but that doesn't cover all of the real estate licensees in the country. So how can we share our information with each other? And that's what RESO helped put together and what Transport's been working on. And this is the diagram for ULI here. And it really is about creating that digital fingerprint for the professional entities. And that's not just the ULI itself, that's also where the UOI comes in. So here you see the scoring system. And there's a formula for how you put that together. And it tells you that this person or these 3 people may be what you're looking for. And then you can decide on your own looking through that. And then what we have is a resolver network that if you're a part of that resolver network, someone can ask you, hey, I've got this agent. Do you already have this agent? Do they have an ID already? Is this the same person? And what we've talked a lot about, and I know this is most of the work that Transport's done, but we've also helped give them some ideas there, is how do you do that communication, right? Like, it's one thing to have a diagram, but then what does that transport actually look like for that information? How do you actually do the resolver network? And that's where ActivityPub came in. And in talking with RESO, the idea here is hopefully we have, like MRED is going to be volunteering to do, have organizations that are going to be resolvers that will say, hey, here's our node, here's the unique ID we have for this agent. Does anyone else have this already? Do you want to generate a new ULI? And we want to make sure that we want to really recruit a lot of all of you to come in here too. Like we're talking right now, I'm happy to say with Grosszone, with Rapatoni, those are 2 AMSs that are in our marketplace, and those association management systems will be great people to be a part of this resolver network because they're already handling most of this license information. But the idea is that RESO could also help. Even though the general idea is to be decentralized completely, we could start with a bit of a registry at the RESO level, just so we have something for a resolver node to hit against, because like for me, right now, the other ULI tests are not happening anywhere in the Midwest. They're happening in the Northwest and the Northeast. So that's not going to be super helpful for me to use their resolver to check for my agents because there's unlikely to be crossover with our marketplace. So RESO will be helpful for that because at least I can get some information back and forth. Let me go back here real quick. So just one thing to talk about on the MRED side of things. So this is something we have built internally. We are using this already, the ULI. We are matching agents right now, basically just deduping against our old database. So we're looking for people who have maybe come back into the business. We're checking them against existing license networks. People have moved out of the state, come back to the state. And we've even built a little bit of a UI for our associations who we work with to do all the membership management so they can put in the agent's information. They fill out their name, their email, their phone number. They fill out their NERDS number, their license number if they have it, which that's not always something that they get, because in Illinois you have to wait 30 to 45 days to get a license number identified. I see Eli nodding his head over there. So you don't always get all the information you need, but we get enough. And then what that does, they hit the button and say, create ID. We pull up this little window, and it either says nothing, nobody matches, and do you want to create a ULI or unique ID right now? And they can do that. Or it gives you 2, 3, 4 matches, and you can pick to use one of those and use the already existing ID. So this is not vaporware. This is something that MRED is using right now internally. Our next step, which we're going to work with RESO on, and which we'll be talking about in the interoperability work group and with transport, is how do we take that outside of MRED? And then how do we share that information with other resolver nodes? And how do we understand if our person exists outside of the MRED marketplace? So we're really excited about that. And we do think ActivityPub is going to be a really simple, lightweight, easy way to pass that information around. And the idea, again, is like these verifications, they travel. We can set them so they're automatically verified. Like all of this stuff is happening like within a second, really, really quickly for us. We want that to be as quick as possible. But we also want to get a lot of verification back. And there is still some work to do on like how many verifications you wait for before you pick that ULI, what happens if you generated a ULI, and then another resolver node pops up and says, well, I actually had that person, how do you match those conflicts together? That's why we need more people using this system and doing more work on it, because then we can start to test some of those things out in real time and figure out the answers to those questions. All right, questions on ULI. How many other people in this room have or know of some kind of testing around ULI? Anyone do that? Paul, good, BPP, excellent. Like for us, for MRED, like this was solving an actual problem for us. We are switching how we generate IDs for our agents. And it was really important that as we switch that process, that we clean up a lot of bad practices from the past. And so the ULI, we're going to have the MRED unique ID, which is what they'll use to log in. That's going to be a shorter, like 6, 7-digit number like they're used to now. But then we'll also have the ULI, which doesn't work as well for a user ID. It's a lot longer. But we'll also send that out with the MRED unique ID, so that way if someone's using information outside of the MRED system, they can still track and make sure that that person's who they need to be and the unique person that they think they are. So, excellent. Then another problem solved for us that we also talk about in interoperability a lot was the persistent parcel. That's UPI. And just as a reminder, this was the Heather before ULI. So 2 years ago, UPI was getting all its flowers on stage, lots of presentations. And we just want to remind people of these things because it's good to talk about every once in a while and come up with, especially when you run into a problem that you haven't had as an MLS before or as an organization before that this solves. So the UPI, it's permanent, it's deduplicated, it's resolvable. For those of you who haven't seen it, this is the breakdown of that. It matched really well with the different versions of Weller that are out there. It was great color matching, so that was a nice little surprise there. But it does tie every property back to its originating authority. I'm not going to go through each part there, but you know there is that there's the way to calculate it, to put it together for yourself. I know that there's several entities that are using this now that are feeding it out. For MRED, we are using that internally with our partner DynaConnections. That's our MLS vendor, one of our MLS vendors, and we haven't fed that out yet, but we're also about to get into our first data share. And that's where we see a real use case, obviously, for UPI, because we're about to have a whole lot of overlapping information from a market that's right next to ours in Illinois. And we want to make sure that we are deduplicating that data as well as we can. And also that when we're feeding it out, adding in things like the UPI to our data feeds just to help any downstream consumers, make it a little easier on them to understand what property is coming from where. In addition to things like originating system, source system, I heard that conversation in R&D too, so I won't go into it here, but for those of us doing front end of choice, those are two very, very important fields to use and make sure you understand correctly when you're doing that. So UPI, that's why it matters. It's all about data accuracy, it's about reliability, and it's about increasing the trust in your data. And this is something that Catherine's very passionate about in Canada because they have lots of duplication up there that they're trying to work through right now. And then our last little image here, like obviously UPI is something that could go global. And as we get more and more involved in the international scene, or deduplicating these properties across the world, UPI can be extended, made to work for that country. If you're looking at that image of that AI, you can tell that at this point in the presentation, the AI itself has had a little bit too much bourbon because nothing on there actually makes sense when you start looking at the words. But this does, again, make it so a single property can be recognized across borders. So for us, this is a really, really good formula. ULI, UOI, UPI. The activity pub is the what, driving the who of the ULI and the UOI, the organization and the person. And then the where is the UPI, that property, and how it shows up. And this is really how we start getting great interoperability at a very basic level, is we hit this high point of making everything interoperable and connected because we're all agreeing on who the person is and what the property is and who the organization is. So for us at Interoperability, we talk a lot about cooperation and collaboration. And this is a great way to make us all friends because we can work together super easy. We can agree on what's important. And we don't have to wonder, is my agent the same as your agent? And that is our love letter to real estate and to bourbon. And my apologies to Greg Sachs because Catherine did the slides early and I got them in late by a week. So I will give you a bottle of bourbon later, Greg, that you and I can share together because we really do love real estate, love making it easier for everyone in interoperability. We hope that you feel the same way. We'd love for you to join us if any of this sounded interesting to you. We meet on the second Tuesday of mostly every month, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. And again, this is a business and tech group. So we do talk a little bit of tech. We'll have Josh Darnell come in every so often and talk to us. We'll have people from transport come in. But then we do spend a lot of time talking about the business needs, the business use cases, and how we implement some of these things in real life. And we're getting more and more examples of that showing up in the group, which is awesome to see because then that hopefully inspires others to do similar things in their markets. And with that, I don't see Sam. Oh, Sam's in the back, but I think the happy hour is starting a little earlier because we were going to try and hustle through this. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and see the Warriors for Transport tomorrow morning.